What kind of motorcycle should I get first?
Hey Caleb, great question. Hi everyone, this is Rob from Intended Consequences. Today we are going to do things a little bit different here. Instead of telling you what motorcycle is best or worst for a new rider, I'm going to help you decide what motorcycle is most likely best for you when you start out pursuing the ride. Hit the graphic. There are plenty of articles and YouTube videos out there with titles such as Top 10 Best Beginner Motorcycles and Top 10 Worst Beginner Motorcycles. So if a generic list is what you're looking for, then they certainly exist in abundance. However, with all the different bikes on those lists, certainly they can't all be right. And if they can't all be right, then how are you, the new rider, supposed to determine which is the right one? For me, it was certainly a bit overwhelming with so much advice consuming my research. If you're new to motorcycling and are researching or thinking about your first motorcycle, it's important to choose one that best suits you. Please, stick with me for a few minutes while we step away from what other people think and examine what you are most interested in when you think of your future as a motorcycle rider. So, how do you envision yourself in your riding future? Maybe it's hunched over a sleek, fast bike, or upright on an iconic cruiser, or even tearing up some trails in the woods somewhere. If I were to bet, you probably already have some idea of what you're interested in. Now, you just need to polish that vision a little bit by getting a bike that matches your interests. So essentially, what we really need to do is identify the basic types of motorcycles that are out there and what they are designed to be used for. Let's start with dirt bikes. Dirt bikes are usually small, lightweight, smaller engine motorcycles designed for off-road riding. They don't have much range compared to other motorcycles, but can handle dirt paths, water crossings, and rougher terrain far better than any others. By design, most of these are not street legal. However, some of them are, although I wouldn't recommend using one as a daily commuter. If you enjoy watching motocross, then this could be the style for you. If you're interested in having a motorcycle that can perform off-road and is relatively comfortable as a daily commuter, then an adventure motorcycle might be for you. Adventure motorcycles haven't always traditionally been part of the basic types discussion, but with their rapidly growing popularity, I'm going to include them here. Compared to their smaller dirt bike cousins, adventure bikes are heavier, more powerful, and are much more efficient on the street. But the downside is, because of their size and weight, they are not as nimble or easy to maneuver off-road. That being said, because they are still designed to ride on and off-road fairly well, they have become very popular with people who are interested in both types of activities. If off-roading really isn't something you're interested in, then no worries. All the remaining motorcycles I'm going to talk about are designed for street use only. Now that's not to say you couldn't take your street bike off-road. I'm just saying they were never intended to. Take standard bikes, for example. These are mid-range motorcycles across all metrics and combine elements of all street bikes into, well, a standard motorcycle. They are reasonably comfortable and able to get you around town easily enough and still fun enough to zip around some windy roads. They're pretty generic. But after this video, if you're still uncertain what type of motorcycle to get, I would recommend starting out on a standard motorcycle. But if the standard is sounding like a boring jack of all trades, master of none type bike, then perhaps the sport bike is for you. Designed almost exclusively for high-speed performance, sport bikes are reasonably small, lightweight, agile, and very powerful. They have one purpose and one purpose only: to be the fastest motorcycles on the road. If watching MotoGP is something you enjoy, then the track might be in your future and the sport bike is the way to get there. But maybe you're more about the image than the speed. Maybe you've seen some classic motorcycle films, and for you, the cruiser is the only way to go. Big, heavy, loaded with torque, cruisers are reasonably comfortable, low-riding machines designed for, well, cruising. Generally speaking though, cruisers are very simplistic motorcycles that are great for getting around town and for rumbling through twisty roads, but don't really offer much in the way of comfort for longer hauls. In truth, none of the previously mentioned motorcycles are designed for the long haul quite like the touring motorcycle, with the exception of perhaps the adventure bike. Sure, you could slap some saddlebags on a cruiser and pretend it's a touring bike, but it's not nearly the same thing. Touring bikes are the SUVs of the motorcycle world. big, heavy, loaded with storage compartments and features like cruise control. These bikes make long trips much more realistic, and they're easily the heaviest bikes money can buy, but probably the most consistently comfortable too. If you've ever wondered what traveling on a recliner with two wheels feels like, a touring motorcycle is probably the closest thing. That being said, the weight and size on touring bikes can be somewhat challenging for new riders, especially at low speeds and tight maneuvers, so I would not recommend this style right out of the gate. A few other basic styles I'm not going to elaborate on too much, but that you should be aware of, are scooters and three-wheelers. Scooters are basic, lightweight, and slow. Some places don't even require a motorcycle endorsement to ride them. On the three-wheeled side, Can-Am makes popular machines with two wheels in the front and one wheel on the back. And these are getting more popular, so you've probably seen them around town. But motorcyclists' opinions vary on how biker these machines really are. Of course, on the flip side, Harley-Davidson has a Tri-Glide, which is basically a very large tricycle on steroids. And I haven't heard anyone question that one. So the debate rages on where three-wheelers fall in the motorcycle lexicon. I'm going to leave it alone for now. Oh, right, and electric bikes. I guess those are a thing now too, but they're just so darn expensive I couldn't tell you a thing about them. We'll revisit the electric bikes someday in the future. I want to point out that this is not an all-inclusive list, and there are many subcategories of motorcycles that are more or less combinations of the ones I've just discussed. And while the motorcycle industry and community can generally agree on the basic types, it can get a bit inconsistent when trying to break down more specific bikes. For example, at what point does a cruiser become a touring bike, or standard into a sport bike, or a naked bike? Yeah, I said naked. The right bike and a couple modifications, and suddenly what once was one thing has changed into something else. Or has it? Anyway, all that is to say that beyond the basic types of motorcycles, there's a world of gray that can be both interesting and equally frustrating. My advice to any new rider is to stay away from the fancy jargon and stick with the basics. Okay, so now I want to leave you with some observations and tips when deciding what type of motorcycle to start out on. The first is to examine the engine size within context. Almost every motorcycle advertisement leads with the engine size like it's the end-all be-all for how fast or powerful a motorcycle can be. And this is true when discussing motorcycles of the same type, but can be drastically different when comparing different types. For example, most Harley-Davidson Sportsters boast a 1200cc or cubic inch engine. And that's not too shabby, and from what we just learned about cruisers, it sounds about right. A Kawasaki Ninja 650 has a, wait for it, 650cc engine, and that ain't too shabby either. Now, if we were to judge these bikes merely by engine size, the Sportster's engine is practically double that of the Ninja, but you wouldn't know that if they ever raced. I mean, it wouldn't even be a contest. Again, one engine is designed for strength and the other performance. Now, if you wanted to compare the Ninja 400 to the 650, then that would be a fair comparison. Another thing is, you may see some folks refer to some motorcycles as slow in some derogatory way. Like other things, it's important to remember the context here because all motorcycles are pretty darn quick. It would be more accurate if someone said, well, this motorcycle is slower than this other motorcycle. That could be true, but my response is still to put this into perspective. Street motorcycles are still bound to the same speed limits as every other vehicle on the road. But even at that, motorcycles are affected by road conditions much more than any other vehicle, which means that a good, safe rider is going to go under the speed limit on roads that are either freshly wet or there's poor visibility. So, in that sense, it doesn't really matter how slow or fast a bike is compared to others. So, unless you're racing on a track, it doesn't matter. But this video is for new riders. And hey, new riders, you aren't ready for track days, so don't even think about it. You're also likely going to hear someone refer to outgrowing your first motorcycle, so to think about that when getting your first bike. I've heard and seen folks use that expression as a way to discourage a new rider from purchasing a smaller, lighter weight bike because once they get used to riding it, they'll turn around and purchase a bigger, more powerful motorcycle. The truth is, you should be purchasing a smaller motorcycle as your first motorcycle, simply because they're often more forgiving on the controls and easier for someone with little to no experience to handle. If you don't care about that sort of thing, and you should, then allow me to point out smaller motorcycles are generally cheaper. And let's face it, you're probably going to drop your bike at some point within your first year riding. Do you want to drop your little cheap bike or your big expensive one? So yeah, go with a smaller, lighter motorcycle up front until you're experienced enough to purchase a newer one with more features, a bigger engine, the capacity to do more stuff that you want to do. It's not that you won't enjoy the smaller bike as you're learning. In fact, you'll probably come to love that bike. But it's important to remember that growing your skills and muscle memory is more important your first year than worrying about when to spend 30 grand on a super tour and riding across the country, or wondering when you'll be ready to upgrade to that super sport and launch yourself into space. Lastly, when trying to decide to get a new or used bike, the real answer is you get what you can afford. New motorcycles, like all vehicles, depreciate in value pretty quickly as soon as you roll out of a dealership parking lot. So, online and other places, you can typically find good deals on used beginner motorcycles that are only a couple years old with low mileage. So I would recommend that strategy for most folks. Now, if you got the cash to burn, certainly the idea of a new bike nobody has ever ridden before can be appealing, and that warranty can have a good feeling too. My first and second bikes were bought used, and I have no regrets. Corinne, she bought her bike brand new, and also no regrets. So ultimately, it just comes down to whatever your financial situation is. Regardless if you purchase used or new though, I would highly recommend you look for a motorcycle with anti-lock brakes, or ABS. New riders can get jerky on their rear brakes as they're learning, especially with emergency braking. Rear tire lockups from too much rear brake too quickly can potentially be saved by a more experienced rider, but for new riders, the result often is you're going to drop the bike and go down. I've known some more experienced riders who look down on ABS as an unneeded and more expensive feature. But the value to a new rider and the potential to save a hard drop cannot be understated. Again, if you can afford the extra $500 or so, get a bike with ABS. If you can't, I recommend a steady dose of practice time in a parking lot dedicated to correctly performing emergency braking, especially that back brake. Okay guys, the point of all of this is for you to decide what type of riding you want to start out doing and then purchasing a bike designed for that activity, while at the same time allowing for you to continue improving your skills and gaining invaluable experience, so that when you are ready to purchase your second motorcycle, you will have the skills and experience not only to just kill yourself on it, but to have a really good time too. And yeah, you're going to buy multiple motorcycles. You can pretty much count on that. Say, if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And remember, keep the rubber side down, and I'll see you next time.